I am going to have a record today. And it's not the longest sermon ever preached. This is probably the shortest message I've ever written. It's longer, I just told Leah, it's longer than Jesus wept. But it's not quite an epistle. It started out at my usual word count, so here's a little sneak peek, but I was doing everything and too much, and we have had quite the weekend, and so I just wanted to do enough. And sometimes our enough is enough. Yesterday, we gathered and celebrated the life of Jeannie Hauser. It felt so good watching the pictures play across the screen. One of the best collages I've ever seen. It was like, you know, in the movies when they do a flashback and a person's life goes before. I felt like we were invited to her life going before our eyes, and the life of her family and her children and all the places, and that was special. We said our see you laters in the ways we know how, with words, with singing, with a shared meal that was enough to feed a village, and that continued to feed even after we left. And today, some of us, or I guess I could speak for myself, I still carry yesterday. There's a quiet that comes after a funeral for me. There's a quiet that comes after hard things for me, because the world, again, I've been watching a lot of movies lately. Look, I had deleted it all from my transcript, but it appears you're getting it anyway. But the world is moving like the Flash, and you're just kind of standing still. We don't all move at the same pace. Some of us woke up this morning, and whether it was the loss of Jeannie or memories that sometimes our grief can bring up, or a circumstance or a situation that you are going through, you woke up and not a thing had changed. That is kind of where this text meets us. 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus, a 7-mile walk. I already know I wouldn't have been there because that's a long way. But I also understand how, a little more about the Mennonites, because y'all be lying. You will say that, well, let's just go real quick. It's right up the street, and it is a walk to Emmaus. I track 12 to 15,000 miles every Middlecon a day, because steps every Middlecon, because they'd be like, oh, it's right down the way. And what that really means is a village apart. For these disciples, it's the 3rd day after their worlds had fallen apart. They're walking away from the place where hope was supposed to take hold, and instead it became undone. They are yapping, well, I could have said talking, sorry. They're talking as they walk. And maybe they were yapping, that's a long way. You got a lot to talk about. They were turning the stories over in their mouths, trying to make sense of it. But we had hoped, is what they said. Not we hope, not we still believe. Well, we had hoped. They are naming what was lost, but also what they expected afterwards. But let's give them grace. They aren't doing anything inherently wrong. They're doing what people do when something sacred breaks. They're trying to keep moving. Unfortunately, they're moving in a framework that I like to call a confirmation loop. They're talking to each other, which means they're only hearing what they already believe together. The story they're telling is being confirmed by the person walking beside them who lived the same experience. They are in a spiral of their own doing. And they're reaching for the story that makes the most sense given what they have seen and felt. And then, without fanfare or announcement, someone joins them. The stranger. There's a song that I used to sing at my old church, and it said, hold on, I gotta find it. You know I can't carry a tune, hold on. It said, there is a stranger in town who's given sight to the blind. He is the great emancipator. He turned water to wine. This stranger, this man from Galilee. So every time I say this stranger, the vocal stem in me wants to sing the whole part. So there you go. So the stranger breaks the loop just by showing up. And he doesn't argue, he doesn't convince, he doesn't correct. He just arrives with a question. A question from someone outside the loop can loosen the grip of a story that we're playing on repeat. He already knows who they are before they say a word. He doesn't wait for their clarity as the condition for his presence. He simply asks, what's going on? What are you carrying? I appreciate, even in the reading, just how incredulous they felt it to be. You don't know about Jesus of Nazareth? They stood there, the text said, looking sad. How many of us have just been standing around looking sad? They tell the whole story as they understand it. Who Jesus was, what they believed, how it ended, the report that something happened, even though it might not feel real. They tell the truth of their experience, and he listens. That's important. He listens. He meets them inside this story, and only after they have spoken does he begin to speak. And I giggle at this part because Jesus be turned up sometimes. He said, you foolish people, your dull minds keep you from believing all that the prophets talked about. If your parents are in here, have they ever said you had a dull mind? That's a tough one. I won't even look up because I don't even want to know. I'm sorry, I asked. I want to say this because I tend to be careful in this area. This language can be tough. You foolish people, dull mind. Here, Jesus is not talking about intelligence. He's not addressing cognitive capacity or the way our minds created. He is not eliminating or calling them something that has the potential to have been caused by a developmental delay or a mental health challenge. The foolishness is not in how they were made, because in God that is fearfully and wonderfully done. What he is pointing out is what pain does to our belief systems. What accumulated sorrow and exhaustion do to our capacity to receive what we already know to be true. These disciples had the prophets. They had the whole arc of the prequel, but their struggles have become the loudest voice in the room. But he doesn't beat them up for it. He walks them back through what they already know. He walks them back through the things that held suffering and promise together. What they knew had not disappeared. It had been buried under the weight of what they are living through. I know something about that ride on that particular struggle bus. In 2019, I was on my own Emmaus road and I didn't know it yet. I had done the brave thing and came out and let the chips fall where they may. And fell they did. By the end of the day, I had no church and no friends. My pay was being garnished because of medical debt from years of racial malpractice and neglect. I was still mourning the loss of my best friend and Samuel's dad from suicide a couple of years prior. I was working in a toxic environment. Did not my heart break? I stopped being able to recognize myself. And maybe I didn't recognize God either. But all I knew to do was keep it moving. Me and Dory, just swimming. And I could only barely swim, so it was close. But I was still doing what needed to be done, but I couldn't see clearly. I thought about Amazing Grace when I was writing this and how much I don't like that first verse because it feels so ableist to me and I'm hyper aware and hypersensitive to it. So I spent 40 minutes instead of writing my sermon last night when I was watching Titans, and I went on a tangent rewriting Amazing Grace. I really do be needing some focus help. But And the song is beautiful, and I get the sentiment, because sometimes sentiment and timing does require us to look at intent and impact. We can't cancel everything. We can't cancel everybody. But that amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was blind. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I'm blind, but now I see. And it frames blindness as a problem or as an issue. And I really thought about it last night, and I couldn't find a good alliteration because, it was 11:30, but I decided I would sing it in my own head, that where I once was hidden, I'm now am freed. And it made a difference to me. And thinking about it and looking at what I had been through, what I realized is what I knew about God had not disappeared, but I did feel very far from it. But I kept walking and kept talking to my own confirmation loop, because what I did know is that suffering survives in silos of silence. Suffering survives in silos of silence. Somewhere on that road, a circle of Mennonite and Church of the Brethren people showed up. For where, only God knows. They weren't flashy, and they always brought food. And they just came near and asked questions. Gabriel and Bev and Christina and Scott from Lorraine, and they sat down at tables with me and stayed. Through them, and what I now know it through God, something in me that had been buried under all that loss began finding its way back. And that's what led me here, to this community.
Thanks be to God.
A place where I am repeatedly found and get to help with the finding. When the disciples finally arrived in Emmaus, after God knows how long, remember 7 miles, in them sandals, Jesus, this man, still a stranger to them, moves as if he gonna keep going about his way. They ask him to stay, and he does. And then sitting down, he takes the bread and breaks it. I'm about to make that bread do a lot of theological work, so buckle up. On one side, when I think about it, I see Jesus, broken, given, made known, not in the explaining, but in that breaking. They have went miles with him. You have went years, decades, generations. They had heard him teach, and they still didn't know him till he sat down at the table and broke the bread. The breaking is the revelation there. But two things can be true at the same time. So I also see us, we who are worn down and walking, carrying things we've not yet found words for, but they're not yet ruined in the breaking. Breaking is not the same as finished. A whole loaf feeds fewer than one that has been broken open. What looks like loss is sometimes the very form that makes our nourishment possible. Their eyes were open. They saw him. And in that moment of recognition, child, he vanishes. This would all have gotten on my nerves. They turned to each other and say, "Were not our hearts burning while we talked with us on the road?" That's that 2020 hindsight. The burning was not new. It had been there the whole time. What changed at the table was not that he was suddenly present. What changed was that they finally had a moment, still enough to feel what had already been true on the road. As I wrote this, and I took it out, so I'm about to freestyle real quick because I'm going to say it anyway. This was for you, Nadia. But I watched 2 movies yesterday or this week. Eternals which on the second view was still not good. And I started Audrey. It just wasn't. I tried. I really did. And then I started watching Titans. And so I got through season 1 and a little bit of season 2. And it's not that I watch that much TV. I fast forward through long fight scenes because who has the nerves for that? And scary parts. So I probably got 20 minutes out of each 45-minute episode, but I get the gist. And in both of them, there were characters who were overtaken by the vicissitudes or circumstances of their life and went on to do things that were dangerous to the people who had loved them. And in both, those people didn't leave. Those people stayed and encouraged them to remember. But it's deeper because it wasn't remember who you are. So good hero to bad hero, it didn't say, hey, you, remember who you are. No. They said, remember who I am. And in remembering who I am, remembering who we are. And in remembering who we are, may you remember who you are. That's what happened as a result of that Emmaus road. That's what happened at the table. They were able to remember. They got up that same hour and took that long walk back down the Green Mile to Jerusalem. Back to who they were in Christ. Back to the road that was unfinished. The encounter sent them back to their community. Being found was not the end of the story. They were found, bread was broken, they were fed, and they returned. That is what it means to be found and fed. Not found and full, eat at your own house. That's what the Bible says. Not to be found and finished, but sustained enough to get back up and go. So now I ask us, where do you need to return to? What confirmation loop needs interrupting? What may I remind you of today? I don't have all the answers, but I do know that whatever you carried into here today, whatever has been eroding slowly in ways you have not told anyone in that silo of silence, beloved, you are already known. And that knowing, that presence, does not depend on your ability to perceive it. The disciples did not feel the burning until they sat still together. But the burning had been there, the stirring had been there the whole time. The road was not empty. It may have been long, but not empty. The stranger turned out to not even be a stranger. And the story they thought had ended was already becoming something else before they had the language for it. Your road is not empty either, because the one who already knows you is with you where you are. And what love says to the one it refuses to lose is not a complicated thing. It only says, remember. And once you do, you too will wonder, was your heart not burning? And the answer is yes, it was. And thank God it will continue to be. May it be so.